Hi, Adrian Davis here, and I have the pleasure of sitting with Gordon Galzerano. Gordon, welcome.
Thank
Gordon
you.
is the President and CEO of the Strategic Account Management Association, and I'm here to ask him some questions about the association and why people join the association and the value that they get from SAMA. Gordon, one of the things that I really love interacting with you, and you're fairly new to the SAMA leadership role.
Sure.
It's your passion.
Yeah.
So you came here, you have a vision, you're obviously a very smart individual, but you're very passionate about this.
I am.
Where does that passion come from?
Yeah. So I grew up in sales early in my career, and I think for me, Adrian, I've always, coming from the IT industry, I would not call myself a technologist. I've always sat at the intersection between the business and the technology. I was always more curious about how technology could enable the business outcomes of the customer. So I always found myself far more curious and interested about the customer, their environment, what they're trying to achieve.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to. I apologize.
Yeah, please.
Because I also come from technology and
Sure.
worked with Cisco back then.
Yeah.
That is so, I wouldn't say unique, but unusual.
Yeah.
Because most people who are into technology, they're
Yeah.
into the technology.
Right, yes.
And they don't really think about that intersection
Yes.
of how technology actually enables business outcomes. So how did you come to that?
Well, it was just because I knew what my swim lane was. First of all, one thing I know about myself, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a ones and zeros person, right? And I always had, like I said, the curiosity and the interest in being a problem solver. And so if we had solutions that could solve problems, that was really the intersection and the sweet spot for me. And so over the years, what I realized through Cisco and in my career is that organizations can be really differentiated if they figure out how they can put the customer at the center of everything that they do. And I know that sounds cliche, but it is true.
That's it.
It is true. It's a real differentiator. So when you have a customer-centric culture and you have an organization that is really built around your customers and a strategy to align and execute against that, that is when the magic happens. That's when you start to see organizations go from good to great. It creates the resiliency that some of the things we talked about. It helps mitigate risk around disruption. That is what I just have an absolute passion for. And so, having been introduced to SAMA many, many years ago as a practitioner, and now seeing what the real fruit of that labor yielded,
Yes.
and now being part of a community that pays it forward to others, I just love it. It's where I want to spend my time. I want to work with good people, I want to work with a good purpose, and I want to help organizations leverage what I know and what we can do as a community to help them thrive.
And you're doing it.
And we're doing it. Yeah,
So I
same
think
here.
everybody here knows you,
Yeah.
but for those people who don't know Gordon Galzerano, tell us who you are and what SAMA is.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, so who I am, I'm a veteran of the IT industry. For 30 years, I was in distribution, and then 24 years at Cisco Systems. Retired in 2020, right around the time of COVID,
Yeah.
and then started a boutique consulting practice. But how that comes full circle in SAMA is through my career, and especially early on in Cisco Systems, when we were growing dramatically, customers doing business with us really found it complicated. We weren't consistent around the world. It was hard. It was complex. And it was in 2002 that Cisco was introduced to the Strategic Account Management Association, all around the practice of helping organizations create competitive differentiation, but also use strategic account management as a growth lever within their company and for their customers and partners. And so in 2002, that was kind of day one for me in my indoctrination to the community. And we're the world's largest community of practice around strategic customer engagement. And if you think about the makeup of our organization, it's a three-dimensional model. One is a community of thought leaders and consultants and researchers and academics that help us understand the trends and insights of what's next in anticipation of looking around corners. The second dimension are our very strategic partners like Whetstone, with you and Jennifer and the team, helping to enable our community, whether that's skills-based or frameworks or mindset, on how to take advantage of the best of SAMA, but also through the intellectual property that you've cultivated, which is leading edge.
Awesome.
And so thankful for that piece. And then the third piece, I think, which is creating the greatest value as well for members, is those that are on the front end of the curve that don't really understand what success looks like in strategic account management as an organization. They then lean into SAMA at the center and the intellectual property that we have around what are the 9 elements that make strategic account organizations thrive, and leveraging that practitioner community, organizations who have come before them, to actually learn how to do it. Because they all understand what,
Yes.
they understand the
Yes.
why, but
But
they
how?
really struggle with the how.
Which is exactly where you were when you were a leader at Cisco.
That's exactly
and,
it.
and customers are putting pressure to say we need a better experience, but you didn't necessarily know how. That's why you came to SAMA.
That's exactly right.
Now you're in this leadership role.
Yeah.
Can you share with us your vision for SAMA? Where do you want to take SAMA?
So there are a couple of areas where I think we have to go.
Okay.
First of all, I think strategic account management as a practice, as a community, is one dimension of several. What we know to be true, and we've talked about it here at the conference this week, the human network is at the core of who we are. It is our community that extends across that 3-dimensional model that I just described.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, there is so much disruption happening in the marketplace today, whether that's through the proliferation of technology or evolving and changing customer expectations, which is shifting sands every day, as you know. And then third, the pressure from agile competitors that can come into a marketplace and be incredibly disruptive. So when I talk,
everybody's feeling this, right?
they're all
Across the
feeling
board,
it,
yes.
irrespective of industry,
That's right.
irrespective of geography. And so the CEOs and executives I talk to are trying to figure out how do they get ahead, stay ahead, but how do they build an organization that is resilient, that's agile, that's flexible, they can move faster. But that resiliency, especially when we face, like today, the geopolitical headwinds, the economic headwinds, and then just the siloed nature of our organizations. So a big, I think, add to SAMA is the executive conversation, the executive agenda, the CEO agenda being embedded in what we do in SAMA. Because it really does take a strong leadership team
Yes.
behind a culture, a purpose, and a strategy to execute around the customers that are most important to their organization. So the executive piece and the leadership dimension to SAMA, I think, is going to be a really, really important, critical success factor. The one other thing I wanted to say, with the proliferation of technology and AI in
Yes.
particular, we're still on the very front end of that curve,
Very
as you
early.
know.
And it's a curve, like
It's moving fast.
Exponential.
And what's true today
Yes.
isn't true tomorrow.
Right.
And so we're very much with our finger on the pulse of what's coming next, so that we can help build those capabilities into SAMA for our community. And then the last piece that's associated with that, because a lot of people are concerned because we've seen job displacement because of AI, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing we know true is the human network, the human dimension of who we are as
Yes.
people, our critical thinking skills, our empathy, our ability to read the
Yes.
room, those are irreplaceable.
Right.
So we want to double down on those capabilities
Very, very
within
good.
us.
What would you say to an executive or a SAM program leader that's thinking of joining SAMA? Maybe not even a program leader, maybe somebody who's thinking that we need to do a better job with our customers. I've heard about this organization called SAMA.
Yeah.
What would you say to them, first of all, why they should join?
Yeah.
And then secondly, what do you think they would notice when they come to the conference?
Oh, great question. I love that question. So the reason why is because that it's been proven through our success and experience that it really is a growth lever. Organizations and CEOs, when I talk to them, they're after 3 things. How can you help drive profitable growth?
Yeah.
How can you help me mitigate and reduce cost? And then third, how can you help me mitigate risk? And that could be cyber,
Profitable
that could be physical.
growth, reduce costs,
Yes.
mitigate risk.
Yes.
And what were the categories of risk that you're hearing about?
Sorry?
The categories of risk that they want to mitigate.
So it's either physical risk, so depending on their geographic footprint and employee safety, or things like cybersecurity risk, which are incredibly pervasive, as you know. So all roads kind of lead back to those 3 dimensions. And what executives begin to recognize when they do join SAMA is that the architecture that we've developed around our 9 strategic elements of what makes a strategic accounts organization
Yes.
effective, they see themselves in it. They know that they can pull levers. They can save to invest in certain areas, to invest to grow in other areas for the customers that they serve. And they see very quickly the benefits of how that starts to change the narrative with their customers and their partners, and how it then feeds into profitable growth, managing and reduce cost, mitigating risk.
Very good.
The second part of your question was
just before we go to the second part of the question was really what would they get from the conference? But before we go there, the 9 elements. I think that's something that SAMA brings, is this knowledge of best practices globally.
Yes.
What actually works based on your research and insights.
Yeah, and that was part 2 of your question, which is what do they see? What do they start to experience at conference, et cetera? It is a community that wants to lean in and help. It's very much a pay-it-forward culture.
Yes.
And I saw this firsthand at Cisco in 2002 when we were in the infancy stage. We leveraged a lot of thought leaders that were part of the practitioner community and partners to help us.
They're very generous, aren't they?
Very generous.
Yes.
And that's the best part.
Yes.
And then what happened was in 2006, Cisco started winning excellence awards from SAMA. And then we started having friends from other organizations like Zurich Insurance and others asking us, how did you do it?
Right.
What were the roadblocks? What were the headwinds? How did you move faster?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, because it's an iterative process where we had to take the bumps, right?
Yes.
We learned from others, but we took our own series of bumps, and then helping organizations get from point A to point B more effectively.
Just thinking that's an amazing journey where you come and you're a sponge, right? You're trying to learn as much as you can.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden you find yourself in a position where people are then looking to you like, how did you do it?
Yes.
The last question I want to ask you, this morning you had 4 awards that you presented, and congratulations to the recipients.
Yes.
Again, for people who don't know about the SAMA community, can you just talk a little bit about these awards and the importance of these awards?
Sure. And the way they're designed is really from an infancy dimension. So one of the first awards that we offered this morning to one of the organizations in the room is the kind of not early in career, but like the young program award. These are the organizations that have now started to embed the SAMA IP with our partners to enable their organization, and now they've brought forward their use case or business case for how it's starting to really crystallize and have a business impact. So we want to reward those that have taken the bold steps to go on the journey.
And just on that, this is like within 5 years, they're starting to see real results.
That's
with
exactly
their
right.
customers.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And then there's an award for mature programs, which are greater than 5 years, as they start to build another degree of sophistication into their model, other series of capabilities, and then the return on investment and the business impact is even more exponential and obvious. Yeah. And then the other 2 really are around, for example, one is around executive sponsorship. So the CEO and the executive team really leaning into the practice of SAM, enabling their organization, leveraging their ecosystem of partners and distributors and so forth, that really helps personify what success looks like. And then there's an innovation dimension to it as well. So it's all about recognizing the community. And so now we have 4 organizations that are willing to raise their hand to help the next generation of organizations move up.
Very, very good.
Yeah.
Last question.
Sure, yeah.
What do you see in terms of the future of sales, the future of account management, the future of supplier-customer relationships?
Yeah, I think, so when we talked about the proliferation of technology, I think a lot of the discovery and a lot of the anecdotal insights and information generation is going to move very quickly to automation, right? The ability to really immerse yourself in understanding your customer or their customer. I think information at our fingertips, that's going to be very much
huge.
It is huge.
Yeah. And that completely changes the game now.
It does.
Yeah.
And what I always say is one of the areas where sellers spend not enough time is really in that discovery dimension of learning more with empathy about their customers. And as we did the CEO mindset session the other day, how do I really understand that higher order agenda on what they care about, and how do I show up speaking their language, right?
So you're saying the preparation stage is going to be automated.
A lot of it will be.
So SAMs and top strategic sellers can show up a lot better prepared.
That's right.
So that's part of what you see in
Exactly.
the future.
Yes.
That was a lot of heavy lifting that SAMs would have to engage in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, before we had the technology,
Yes.
you would maybe be on an earnings call and you read a 10K and have to sift through a bunch of information.
And that would be a big point of differentiation, because there were a lot of people who wouldn't do those things.
That's exactly right.
And so the SAMs who did would clearly differentiate.
You know
themselves.
that all too well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But that's going to become less of a differentiator because it's going to become easier.
Well, here's where I think it becomes a differentiator. It's now you've got the data, now you've got the insights. How do you connect it
Exactly.
to what your customer cares about?
The connection now.
That's exactly right. I can have all the best insights into
So you and I will be able to get the same data with the support of AI and other technologies.
That's
so
right.
we're both going into the same account, we're competitors.
Yes.
We have access to the same data.
Yes.
But I just was content with just gathering the data and showing up.
Right.
What do you do differently with that?
Yeah, I apply it. Like we were talking about, it's really getting inside the head of the customer to understand what are the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. First of all, what is the purpose of the organization, the vision? And then when you get down into the strategy and the key initiatives and priorities, it's with empathy, how do you directly or indirectly align to those things, right? And showing up differently outside in, where we're speaking their language and we're talking about them. We're not talking about us, right?
Exactly.
And what I love so much about what Whetstone does is the leadership dimension to that. It's not just about the SAM, but what about the leaders above them, and how are we preparing them to enable the SAMs based on where the puck is going?
Okay, so we were talking about the future.
Yep.
And one of the things you said was, well, the preparation stage is going to become easier in a sense that it's going to be automated and AI will help. But it's still harder in the sense of the connecting the dots.
Yes.
And being creative in how you understand how you can support their strategic direction.
That's right.
What else will change?
So I think the other piece is that executives now are really struggling with the pace of disruption, like I was talking about.
Right.
And so I think the higher order conversation that sellers are having with executives now is at a different level. A lot of so for example, what we knew to be true from the pandemic is business imperatives and priorities fundamentally changed overnight. Supply chains were being disrupted, et cetera, et cetera.
Just like that.
Those were not necessarily higher order, short-term like concerns, because you had a supply chain dimension and it worked perfectly, and then suddenly, boom, overnight it was disrupted. Boom, you had a cybersecurity attack. Boom, boom, boom. So the higher order agenda, I think, is really, really important to what SAMs need to be having an empathy for and connecting their organization back to their customer. In other words, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is when you think about where you spend your time with customers, that customer engagement dimension, how much time are you spending on run the business versus transform the business? Talking about their strategy, getting inside their head about what's next. That is a fundamental shift from what traditional selling has looked like historically. Flip that coin over. Now based on that, especially as a SAM, as we say, general manager of the customer, right? Which needs to have that broader perspective of their company. Yes, influence without authority oftentimes. How do they get that strategy of their customer embedded in how the organization responds to those requirements? And that sounds academic, but the reality is that's really what's coming next. Is that piece? I think it is. I think it is. Unless if you're seeing, what are you seeing from your perspective? I mean, obviously, you know, with the clients that you work with every single day, Adrian, where do you see the puck going?
And I think what you're saying is absolutely huge, and it really speaks to the value of SAMA. Is you mentioned disruption. So these executives, before it was like, you know, build your strategy, build the structure to support the strategy, and then execute.
Right.
You still have to do those things, but in the process of executing, you begin to realize there are major disruptions in the marketplace. They're unpredictable, they come quickly. And so once you put that structure in place, you can't just lean back and say, it's not like, you know, you set it and forget it.
Right.
No, you have to set and maybe reset and reset.
That's right.
So that ability to adapt, to see around corners, see the signals that are showing up, and be quick to adapt to them, it requires an organizational agility. That's a new muscle, I think, that executives are trying to develop.
That's right.
And that's where SAMs can be extremely beneficial, because my organization is going through this. you're calling on me, but your organization is going through it as well.
Yes.
So SAMA bringing this notion of, hey, we could navigate this together.
Yes.
And together we could co-create value for the end customer who's also going through having to face these
That's exactly right.
disruptions.
That's exactly right. Well said. And you said something about, we have our strategy and we go execute our strategy. Fundamentally, what executives expect is that your strategy is my strategy, that they are
Right.
more closely aligned,
Right.
and it's not always so. And I've seen this firsthand where we show up thinking we know what the customer's trying to achieve, and
Yes.
suddenly it's apples and oranges.
Right.
And then you spoke of it, the agility, the flexibility, and with the speed that we can adapt and modify what we do and how we do it in service of them.
Yes.
Because what was true yesterday is not true
Not
today,
true.
right? And those sands are shifting quickly.
And I think we're heading into a winner takes all future, where if you can't play at this level, and there are people who are playing at this level, suddenly you find yourself shut out at a
Yes.
transactional layer,
No
which
question.
is itself being automated.
No question.
And someone else is working collaboratively and strategically with that customer that you could have been there.
That is so true.
Yeah.
That is so true. And especially in industries where it's somewhat commoditized.
Yes.
More than ever,
Yes.
value and differentiation and competitive differentiation is the sweet spot,
Right.
to your point.
Gordon
Winner take
Galzerano,
all.
what a pleasure. Thank you so
Adrian,
much.
thank you so much, and,
Yeah.
and thank you for your partnership.
Awesome.
You and the Whetstone team have been just amazing, and we'll continue to co-create
Right
and
on.
innovate together. I
And
know.
we
for
feel
sure.
the same about SAMA.
Yeah.